So today I'm really happy to be welcoming Lucinda Sykes onto the podcast. Lucinda is a sleep coach and she works with women in their 50s and beyond. She's a Canadian and she's a retired physician after 40 years in practice. And she also worked as a Jungian psychotherapist for 15 years. And then she spent 23 years practicing or teaching mindfulness-based stress reduction and saw 6,000 clients in that capacity, which is amazing. And Lucinda actually threw away her prescription pad in the 1980s when she moved into psychotherapy. So welcome, Lucinda. It's lovely to have you.
Why, thank you, Sorrel. I feel in good company. I'm very glad to be here. Thank you.
Pleased to have you. So actually, could you start by telling us a little bit about why you threw away your prescription pad and stopped prescribing for sleep disorders?
Well, it was my impression that pharmaceuticals were being overemphasized in the treatment of what we called insomnia. I had dutifully been prescribing for some years as a family doctor. That was my training. But I eventually began to see that I could help women it was primarily women, although I did work with some men at that time also, that they could get results by inquiring into their lives in a psychotherapeutic manner. And that by even changing lifestyle and attitude and reflecting on things, that the pharmaceuticals were not serving them. And in fact, they were clouding their thinking. And even in those early days, I began to think that maybe the pharmaceuticals were actually contributing to the sleep problems. So that's why I gave it up. I'm not hostile to medications. Goodness sakes, I just used an antibiotic cream the other day when I cut my finger. So I'm not hostile to pharmaceuticals, but in the area of sleep, I would offer that actually we called them sleeping pills, Sorrel, but that's a misnomer. That these medications, the chemical substances that they represent, do not induce natural sleep. And that's, of course, I would guess, very important to members of your audience who are concerned about their mental health. Because, gosh, if we're concerned about our mental health, we're concerned about our brain. And these pills do induce states of, shall we say, unconsciousness. They do cause us to no longer be focused on the story and the chattering mind, but at the brain level, they induce states that are very even contrary to the great benefits of sleep. And we know now there's so much research indicating that the chronic use of sleeping pills contributes to really quite a wide range of problems subsequently, unfortunately, including dementia.
Oh, wow, that's interesting.
Yeah, so that was quite a question you just asked me, Sorrel.
Well, nice. Well, actually, that brings me to a subject that is, I know, dear to both our hearts, which is the subject of the glymphatics.
Ah, yes. Isn't that fascinating research? Goodness sakes, and it's so new. Here we are knowing something that previous generations had no idea of, that while we are sleeping, the brain is actively cleansing itself. In fact, we have these astroglial cells in the brain. They're like companion cells to neurons. And when we go into deeper sleep, those cells, those astroglial cells, actually reduce themselves in size. Just think of that. They actively reduce themselves in size so that channels open up and thereby the brain can cleanse itself. This cerebrospinal fluid can flood through the brain and eliminate the metabolites which have collected during the day. Because it turns out when we're being conscious and thinking fancy thoughts, perhaps as you and I are doing right now, the brain is slowly but definitely accumulating even toxic metabolites. And so we rely on the sleep process to flush it all away. That's the glymphatic flow.
And my understanding is that happens during deep sleep. Is that right?
Yes, quite right. I'm so glad you point that out. It's not just nodding off. It's about entering the deepest level of sleep. We can identify that through looking at brainwave patterns.
Yeah.
And during that time, that's when the brain does this, I think of a symphonic process. The brain waves are pulsing, and then the astroglial cells are reducing themselves in size, and then there's a flush through the
Yeah.
brain at that time.
And if when people are taking sleeping tablets, that
There's the
deep
risk.
sleep, it doesn't happen, does it?
Well, all the evidence would suggest it does not. For one thing, as I mentioned, we have numerous research papers now looking at the health outcomes of thousands of individuals that taking sleeping pills chronically, you get an increased incidence of dementia, Alzheimer's, and perhaps other forms
Yeah.
of dementia too. And it is very possibly the outcome of not flushing away these metabolites. And a very interesting study came out just in 2021, based on more than, I think it's about 8,000 civil servants. Their
Right.
health was followed over about 25 years. Civil servants in Britain. And
Yeah.
it was determined that if they had the habit of sleeping 6 hours or less, then by the time they were in their 70s, they had a 30% increase in dementia.
Wow.
Isn't that shocking?
Yeah, that is shocking, actually.
Yes. So all those years, the midlife years, 50s and 60s, there you are sleeping and you are cleansing your brain. But if you aren't giving the brain enough time to do so, you're sleeping 6 hours or less, it builds up.
And that's interesting because I know that you work principally with women in their 50s and older.
Correct.
A
Yes.
bit about why you chose that particular group of people to work with.
Well, I just love it, actually. I enjoy it. I like to work with older women. I began in family practice, and then I worked as a psychotherapist within the Canadian healthcare system. And then I was teaching MBSR, mindfulness-based stress reduction, for decades, also within the Canadian healthcare system. And I worked with whoever came to me and whoever was sent to me. And but now that I have retired, I've been able to narrow my focus to shall we say, a demographic that I really enjoy working with, women in the second half of life.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What is it in particular that you enjoy about working with that group?
Well, they have suffered.
Yeah.
They have suffered, and these are the years of wisdom. There's a ripening, a ripening. My background's in the psychology of Carl Jung, and we would understand that there's a kind of natural process that happens through the life. Jung called it individuation. And one of the elements of that is the accumulation of wisdom. And that's most definitely what's going on in the second half of life. And it's wonderful to foster that process for women. And I like to work with women, not only because I too am a woman, but also women have been marginalized. And I know these days you think, well, it's not happening, but psychologically, it's still the case. And I like to assist women. And you see, in this way, I believe I'm, in my very humble way, assisting the society, because mature women have a great deal to contribute to social discourse. And we're really, as a globe, are dealing with such serious issues. And the viewpoint of mature women is vital.
Yeah. And if those women aren't sleeping well.
Yes, if they're not sleeping, if they're not happy, if their minds are caught up in worrying about this and that, they can't contribute. And yeah, and the mind loses its balance and its focus if we have not had sufficient sleep.
Yeah. So actually, on that subject, can you talk a little bit about how you work with your client group? And I know you use a bit of mindfulness and you use Jungian psychology. Do you talk a little bit about that for us?
Yes, I like to joke that I use whatever I've got. I work with women. I most enjoy working with women individually, because then I can settle into to working with them as individuals
Yeah.
rather than in my medical training where one works with categories, diagnostic labels, and so on. But in truth, especially in the world of mental health, we're all unique. And so I like to just work with the woman individually, and then we look at those understandings that come to us through psychology and sleep medicine and the like. We look at the understandings that are relevant. But I do also, most definitely, I teach mindfulness still. I teach online programs for women over 50 who are having sleep problems,
Oh,
mindful
right.
sleep. Yes,
So that's more of a
because
group
it
program.
contributes. It contributes also those people who are seeing me individually. I also want them to have the group experience of mindfulness, so it goes very
Yeah.
well together.
So it's a nice combination. And I think you also do a bit of dream work, is that right?
Well, in my individual work, yes, depending on the woman who's with me, if dreams are there for her, then we can certainly look at dreams. Dreams are are a message from the non-conscious side of ourselves.
Yeah.
And this is my background with the psychology of Carl Jung, of course. And by paying attention to dreams in this manner that I was brought up to do, so to speak, for the mentors, the training. By looking at dreams in this manner, we can I get a sense of what the non-conscious side is wanting to do. And we like to facilitate the conversation between the non-conscious side and the conscious side. But not to overemphasize this in our conversation, because there'll be many people in the audience that's not their cup of tea. And so dream analysis has a place. Like I say, I use what I've got
You
when
use
I'm
what
working
you've
with
got.
women
Yeah.
individually. So yes, I've got dream analysis, but I've got mindfulness and also sleep science.
And sleep, of course, the sleep science.
Yeah, to encouraging women to go to bed. Don't stay up. Don't stay up scrolling through Facebook or something. Go to bed at your bedtime. And in the morning, even if you didn't get a good night's sleep, get out of bed. Don't lie there thinking I'm going to try to get more sleep, because efforting, trying to make myself sleep, is actually contributing to worse sleep the next night.
That's important to know.
Yes, don't just lie there regretting you didn't get good sleep. Just say, well, I didn't sleep as well as I wanted to. Get out of bed and go into your life. And most especially, if you can, expose yourself to daylight every day,
Yeah.
preferably at the same time every day. And maybe for most people, that will be morning sunlight. But if you're someone who wakes up far too early in the morning, then you might be better served if you expose yourself to daylight in the afternoon. So in this way, you're beginning to entrain your, we call it the circadian clock, that
Yeah.
region of the brain that really masterminds the rhythm of sleep for us. So we like to have, maybe half an hour, ideally, maybe more 45 minutes of natural sunlight. You can wear a hat if you want, but usually good not to wear sunglasses, because we want the daylight to flood into the brain and help the circadian clock entrain. But you can wear a hat, of course. And also good to be active. Good to be active. And this doesn't need to be fevered stints at the gym unless that's really something you like to do. But it could also be a walk every day. And if you can, walk in a natural setting so that your heart can open to the natural world. But if all you have is the shopping mall, well, then go and walk there. But you want your body, you want to be active, because your body wants to be active, and that will assist your sleep. If you've had a day of physical activity, you're more likely to have some sleep drive at night, and you can go to sleep.
Is there an ideal time to get out and take that exercise?
Well, the sleep scientists are there are two minds. First off, many emphasize don't do a lot of so-called exercise, active aerobic type of stuff before sleep, because that elevates your body temperature. And when we go to sleep, the body temperature is meant to decrease.
Yeah.
So being really active before bedtime is probably not best for you. And you might be more encouraged to be active by the early afternoon or in the morning. That might be a great time. Maybe when you're getting that daylight and you also have, vigorous walk or this kind of thing.
Yeah.
And, we would do it for our dog. We would
Yes,
do it for our dog. And, that to some extent that gets overlooked in the mental health field, that we really need to care for our animal selves. For example, this glymphatic flow, I think people overlook the significance of sleep because, hey, they don't realize this fancy stuff that their brain is doing while they're sleeping. So there's a kind of diminution of sleep's value in our society. We don't really recognize how important it is, what your brain is doing while you are sleeping. So care for yourself, sunlight, activity, and of course, eating well. The Mediterranean diet is often promoted in the sleep literature, but I'll let people work that one out for themselves. They know to some extent what to eat and what not to eat.
So this is really lifestyle medicine, isn't it, Lucinda?
Oh, yes. Yes. That's why I was so glad to receive your invitation, because I'm sure that I'm intending to contribute to your practice, most definitely your emphasis on the natural approach. And yes, sleep is the foundation to it all.
Can I ask you one more question about sleep medication? I know that you assist people in coming off sleep medication.
Oh, yes. I very much enjoy doing that.
Yeah. Is there any advice you would give anyone listening to this podcast who wants to come off sleep medication about how to go about doing that?
Well, ideally, their practitioner, the one who's been prescribing the medication.
Sure. Yeah.
It's their responsibility, their equal responsibility to assist. And I'll let you work that out with your practitioner. And I don't want to give a lot of details because I don't know the listener individually.
No, sure.
In general terms, you do it slowly. The longer you've been on the medication, the slower you are in coming off. Some suggest that you do one night on and one night off, this kind of thing. Others suggest that you break the tablet into bits and just take a little less at night and don't push yourself. And you will have good nights, so-called good nights and bad nights, but heck, you've probably been having those all along.
It's true.
Yes. And the mind will make a big deal about this, but you're caring for the creature and you're just weaning her off of a substance, a chemical, which the brain has adapted to. You see, our miraculous brain, it adapts. So we give it this chemical over even a short period of time. It starts to adapt. It changes the pattern of brain receptors and so on. So it's adapting to this chemical. And then we decide to, well, I'm just going to get rid of this chemical. And the brain is a little bit out of balance. It's adapted to the chemical. And now it's a little bit out of balance. But the brain will adapt again. So we just give it a chance to come off of the medication. Now, Sorrel, I wouldn't want listeners to think that I am opposed to sleep medication. That's so valuable. Maybe you've had a tremendous shock. A dear family member has died, or you've lost your job, or you've just had surgery, or your back pain is acting up. And that could be a very appropriate time to use medications that eliminate consciousness, so that you're not tormented by a night of being awake, frantically thinking about problems. But the risk is, don't let it become a habit, or dare I say, if you don't mind the word, a kind of crutch. If you can't sleep, so be it. So be it, and there are ways of dealing with that. I'm sure in your work, you're also helping clients with that issue. Yeah, you help them to adapt. And this is our heritage as human beings. Just think of our Paleolithic ancestors in their caves. I'm sure they had some sleepless nights.
I'm sure
It's
they did.
yeah, it's our human heritage. So you don't immediately need to take a potentially toxic chemical to address the issue. It's a transient discomfort, and you can, caring for yourself, address it.
And
But
Lucinda, one thing I learned maybe 2 or 3 years ago, which has really helped me, was that if I've had a bad night, it doesn't mean I will have a bad day.
yes,
I can
yes,
wake up in the morning and think, oh my goodness, that was a terrible night, and still
yes.
okay. And
Oh,
that was like a massive turning point for me when I realized that, because then
oh,
like
yes.
worry about having a bad day.
Yes, so much is in the attitude, isn't it?
It is, yeah.
It's just the expectation, as you're saying.
Yeah,
Yeah, it's just an idea that it's going to be a bad day ahead. But yes,
exactly. And if you're expecting a bad day, you'll probably get a bad day.
yes, and again, we can rely on our biological heritage. We are all descended from survivors, and they
Of
had bad sleep, and
course they
they
did.
had to fight off the wolves and didn't get any sleep at all. And those folks, they got up and they had their lives, and they
Yeah,
survived, and we can as well, and we can have that resilient attitude, most definitely.
yeah, that resilience is there for all of us, isn't
Oh, yes, it's a great resource. It's our heritage as human beings.
it? Yeah, yeah. Like you say, we're what is it? The end of a long line of, maybe it's 100,000 years of evolution. I can't remember, but
Yeah.
we've been on this planet for, I mean, a relatively short time, the life of the planet, but still hundreds of thousands of years.
Yes, we are descended from generations of survivors.
Yeah.
And we have the modern mind, which has all manner of goals and problems and analyzing. And I call it blah, blah. I hope listeners aren't offended. But so often the mind is doing blah, blah. My own mind was
Yes,
doing
it
blah, blah
is.
this morning. I'm making breakfast, blah, blah. But but I am making breakfast for myself as my ancestors have done, caring for myself. And then I'm meeting with a colleague and having relationship and conviviality. And yes, aside from whatever blah, blah the mind might be doing.
And I think the other thing that we haven't really touched upon is the importance of being grounded and centered and present to our present experience. And that's another part of lifestyle medicine for you, isn't it?
Oh, yes, yes.
Yeah.
And this is mindfulness. I'm almost timid these days using this word mindfulness because it's become popular. It's even commercialized. I saw a magazine that was advertising mindful kitchens.
Mm-hmm.
They were promoting some, I don't know, style of kitchen that they decide to call it mindful kitchens. So the word has become debased. So
Yes.
really what you're speaking about is our inherent mindfulness, our
Yes.
our awareness of being here right now. And we don't need to be always improving ourselves, and we don't need to be judging ourselves, but that we don't need to be stopping the judging. We don't need to judge the judging mind. We can witness, oh,
Mm.
I'm doing a lot of judging right now, a lot of blah, blah. Yeah.
Yeah. And just recognizing that the blah blah is just the mind speaking. It's not.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah.
You're asking why I like to work with the ladies over 50. Well, that's in part because we can abandon self-improvement.
I've not thought about it that way, but that's interesting. Yeah, we can.
Yes, you know that you don't need to become better at this or that. Yes, if you like to do that, you like to play board games and so on, by all means, get better at it. But it's not really your mission at this point.
Mm.
You are sitting in the vast garden that you have been cultivating for years, and you can enjoy the harvest. You
I like
can
that.
awaken to what your life has given you. And you don't need to be fussing about putting in another garden and doing this or that. although that may be a habit of the mind, it's certainly a social habit. Our society's encouraging us to constantly be improving this or that. And it's, in a way, it's just a habit of mind. I'm not opposed to improvement, but it can be an attitude that interferes with just the joy of being here now.
Yeah. And when you spent all those years cultivating that garden, why would you rip it all up and start again?
Yes, yes. This is the joy of the second half of life.
Yeah. I think it's a lovely moment to bring this to a close, Lucinda.
Yes.
Thank you so much.
Well, I've done a bit of blah blah here myself, but I hope it's in everybody's service. So good to meet with you, Sorrel, and by extension, your audience too.
Well, thank you for coming and speaking.